feels like a presidential debate. On the spotlights, yeah. We have 5 seats up on this side and 3 seats on the other side. This one right up here. Okay. I guess going once, going twice. We've got 2 seats right up the front. Any takers? Don't be shy. And any other seats that I'm missing? Okay. Yep, one over here, a couple over here. Okay, it's truly amazing to see so many people gathered together in the same room at the same time. I guess it must be extra credit or something, I don't know. So, good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Dean, faculty, and staff of the Salinger School and our friends at M&T Bank, I'd like to welcome you to our 2nd annual DeFrancis Lecture, named in honour of the late Frank DeFrancis. My name is Paul Talon. I'm a faculty member in the Information Systems and Operations Management Department in Salinger and the current DeFrancis Scholar in Salinger. We live in a world that is increasingly defined by data, lots and lots of data, that we and others like us generate each time we buy something, visit a website, click on an ad, or step outside wearing our Fitbit bracelets. Businesses love us because now, through data and data analytics, they're able to learn about us and to predict what we'll do in ways that weren't always possible in the past. The world of professional sports is no different, whether it's data generated by a swing of a bat, an interception, a tweet from the stands, or a trip to the hot dog vendor. Things have come a long, long way since General Manager Billy Beane took player data and what is now called sabermetrics to a whole new level with the Oakland A's back in the early 2000s. If you've seen the movie Moneyball, I know many of you probably have, with Brad Pitt acting the part of Billy Beane, you'll know that data in professional sports can be quite literally a game changer. So fast forward to today as we ask, what exactly are professional sports teams doing with data in 2014? We have 2 guests tonight from the Baltimore Orioles and the Atlanta Falcons, from the world of MLB and the world of the NFL, who can help us answer that question as to exactly what professional sports teams are doing with data. I'd first like to introduce you to Sarah Gelles. Sarah joined the Baltimore Orioles in 2011. As the Director of Baseball Analytics, Sarah is responsible for overseeing the Orioles' collection and analysis of data and assisting the Executive Vice President of Baseball Operations with player acquisitions, roster construction, pro scouting, and strategy. Prior to joining the Orioles, Sarah worked at MLB headquarters in New York City. She previously interned for the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Philadelphia Phillies. A native of Philadelphia, Sarah graduated summa cum laude from Amherst College in 2010 with a BA in Law, Jurisprudence, and Social Thought, which is not what you would have expected, I guess, in the world of big data, but that's the way that it is. So welcome, Sarah. Next is Kevin Schohl. Kevin became Director of Business Analytics with the Falcons earlier this year. He previously worked for Bain & Company and for Charles Bank Capital Partners in Boston, Massachusetts. Kevin has also worked for the Boston Red Sox and, like Sarah, for MLB headquarters in New York. Kevin has a business undergraduate degree from Boston College, where he and I first met in the classroom when I was a faculty member there a little over a decade ago. And more recently, he received an MBA from Harvard. To get the most out of tonight's discussion, I've given Sarah and Kevin 3 questions and asked that they each spend 5 minutes or so on each one. We will go through each question in turn. This should take up about 30 minutes or so, after which we will turn to you guys for any questions and comments from the floor. There will be a roving microphone, and so if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, just please put your hand up and I'll try and make my way down to you. If you're sitting in any of the center parts, perhaps you might move over towards the end so that I can walk up and down the center aisle. It'll make things a little easier. And so to our first question, which I'll call the current state of play around data analytics. Sarah and Kevin, could each of you please try to walk us through what your organization is doing with data analytics at this point? And I thought since Sarah has home court advantage, I thought I'd ask you to lead off. So, Sarah, can you kind of fill us in on exactly what the Baltimore Orioles are doing currently in the analytics space?
Sure. So, can you guys hear me? Okay. So I think, you guys are probably familiar with a lot of what's being done in the public sphere. Baseball especially has a lot of fantastic kind of public research being done. And to be honest, it's very similar to what we're doing internally. There are some differences. We obviously have access to some proprietary data sources that aren't available to the public. But besides that, it's really a lot of what you see, a lot of the great public projects. If you guys are familiar with sabermetrics, there's some famous ones, catcher framing, things like that were done in the public sphere, and we're really trying to ask the same questions that those researchers are. We're trying to better project player performance. We're trying to better quantify aspects of player performance that maybe we have ignored in the past or haven't been able to accurately value. We're obviously trying to translate that into dollars, which is a big aspect. And we're trying to identify undervalued talent. So there's a lot of different ways we can approach that. A big part of it is better data. So a lot of what we're doing is trying to identify better, new data sources. So new technologies, our scouting reports are something that we factor in. But your work is only as good as the input. So the data, I think, is a big focus of what we do. So we're constantly trying to acquire new data sources, collect data internally that maybe we haven't collected in the past, whether it's, something on the scouting side, whether it's player development, strength data to try to better predict injuries. There's a never-ending amount of things out there that have yet to be kind of quantified. So that's something that we're looking at, and it's probably the biggest area for growth, in my opinion, is just new data.
Cool.
Kevin.
Well, I know most of you are here to find out some secrets about the Orioles. Sorry that I don't have any on-field secrets about the NFL. Ravens kind of handed it to the Falcons a couple weeks ago, so congrats on that. Any Falcons fans randomly here? There we go. Rise up. One guy. Love it. So
that's double extra credit.
Yeah, that's right. So Falcons have not had as good of a season as the Orioles did this year, but still plenty of time to turn it around this year. My role, though, is on the business side. So I think you got a great perspective here, both in that you're hearing about baseball and football, but also there's the on-field analytics aspect that a lot of people are interested in and excited about. And then there's also the business side of all these sports teams. I mean, there's a lot of money in sports. Not if you're working for a sports team, but if you're on the team, or if you're the owner, there's a lot of money involved. And there's a lot of analytics that can be done to better understand who are the customers that are going to these games. How can we make the experience for them better? How can we maximize profit while not gouging the fans who are passionate about the team? There's a lot of different aspects of that, whether it's ticket pricing or pulling together different streams of data like food and beverage concessions or merchandise or parking or tweets and Facebook posts. How do you tie that together into sort of one view of the fan? And that really involves a lot of pretty advanced data capability to be able to pull that together and use it. And so there's a lot of things that we're trying to do at the Falcons that are very much still in the infancy. So my role was created just earlier this year, and I was brought in to add a little bit of analytic rigor to the business side of the organization. In a sports team, typically you just sell tickets and you try to sell as many as you can. And in the NFL, it's actually pretty easy. But there's a lot of stuff that you can do, as many of you probably know, to be smarter about who the fans are and where your revenue's coming from and how to manage expenses. And that's not as sexy as figuring out who the closer is going to be or who you're going to draft. But there's a lot of need for that at a lot of different sports teams and sports leagues. So on the business side, I'd say we're still early on. We just implemented a CRM system a year and a half ago. We're just trying to get some data visualization software installed basically this quarter. There's a lot of things that we're doing that we're pushing forward, and a lot of people would be surprised that sports teams haven't done already. But on the business side, I think we're several years behind where the on-field side is. And so I guess to talk a little bit about the on-field side at the Falcons, what we are doing now is we're doing what we can. There's the guys on the football analytics side at the Falcons like to describe the on-field analytics piece as 22 points of chaos, right? You don't have a pitcher pitching to a batter and all the statistics that you can glean from that. And even in baseball, as you know, with she mentioned catcher framing or fielding, there's a lot of other things that people realize that there's a lot more to it than just the batter and the pitcher, of course. But in the football field, it's really hard to isolate anything. And even if you were to do that, you only have 16 games, right? So your N is a lot lower than 162. So it's a little bit harder, but obviously still an important challenge and a lot being done. And the Falcons have had some trouble with injuries. So if anybody has a good idea on injury analytics, we'd appreciate that.
Okay, interesting. And for our second question, I'd like to ask about the technical and organizational challenges that your respective organizations face as you endeavor to become more data-driven over the next few years. For this question, I'll turn to Kevin to lead off this time. But before I do, I'd like to play a short video clip for you showing plans for a new stadium in downtown Atlanta, slated for completion, I believe, in 2017?
2017. So a lot of what my role has a lot to do with the changes that are going on in the organization. So I thought I'd introduce that.
Okay. Something certainly tells me that certain aspects of this futuristic statement will either come about because of data or will certainly be amenable to collecting data. So let's watch the video.
It was our vision to try to do something iconic, unique. As a sports and entertainment venue, it'll be unmatched in the world.
That's our $1.2 billion spaceship. And, so there's a lot involved in making that a reality. And a lot of, the people at the Falcons have been working on that for several years. And the construction is progressing now, and the stadium will be ready for 2017. But there's so many different opportunities included in that, challenges and opportunities. Challenge, of course, is that we have a new stadium, and that requires a lot of money to build. And so there's a lot of analysis to be done on what are our revenue streams going to be, and there's going to be the process of selling out the suites and the tickets for the new stadium. But in addition to that, there is going to be a Major League Soccer team playing in the same venue. And so we go from an organization that has 8 home games a year plus 2 preseason home games a year to one that we manage a venue with 50 events a year. And so people that have been doing things manually in the organization, whether that's in the ticket department or wherever else, they can't do that as easily when they have so much more going on. And so it really requires us to make sure that we invest in technology to house all the data that we have now, and to be able to pull in more data so that we can understand our fans better, try to figure out who is overlapping between the Falcons and the MLS, for example. Who should we sell MLS tickets to versus Falcons tickets? There's all those different streams of data that we can understand, but there's a lot of really cool fan experience stuff we can do as well. And we just hired somebody from Disney who's, as many of you know, Disney is great at their guest experience. And being able to think about what is it like for somebody to sit in a stadium in 2017 with their smartphone. What do they need? Do they want to order concessions from their seat? Do they want to see replay angles? What do they want to see? And also, what can we do to entice them to enjoy different opportunities, whether that's seat upgrades or, when they come into the stadium, maybe the premium seat customers, it tells the service staff that person's there to come over and say hi. I mean, there's a lot of different things that we can do in order to make the fans feel like this new expensive stadium was worth it, that it's a better experience to sit there and watch the game, and also a better experience to interact with the organization and to feel a part of it. And then, there's other things with a brand new stadium that we can do. You saw there's that video board that circles the whole roof, the interior roof. Nobody's ever done that before, and we're hoping that everything goes smoothly, but it's on track. So nobody's done that before, but there's a lot of different technology pieces you can't see in that we're working on, so that we can understand how are fans flowing through the stadium. There's a lot of big data there that we can harness related to utility usage, or which restrooms are too busy, or flow of people at concession stands. A lot of interesting stuff that we can think about conceptually now, but we only have 2 years to figure out how are we actually going to harness it and use it.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think my answer is pretty similar in a lot of ways. It's about, trying to improve our technological abilities to make our, everything more efficient so that we can get to more things. So we have a never-ending list of projects we want to do, and we have limited resources and limited personnel to do it with. So it's about finding the best ways to utilize those personnel. And some of those issues are the same across all 30 teams. So, we have huge data sources. We need databases that can, store all that data. We need analytical tools that can access it and analyze it. We need visualization tools to present it to executives. All of that is something we put a lot of effort into. The flip side, the more strategic side for a team like the Orioles, when I started, we were not a team like, Paul mentioned Moneyball and Oakland A's, and that was over a decade ago. So there are teams that have been doing this for years, and so when we come in with a relatively small front office, we have to be smart about where we put our time. Because if we just started doing the same things they did 10 years ago to catch up, we'd remain 10 years behind. So it's that's why I mentioned earlier the public research that's being done. That's fantastic research. We need to find ways to utilize that and to not duplicate it. So a lot of our focus is where can we find advantages that are new, and we're not just duplicating what our division rivals did 5 years ago. So we're constantly looking at new data sources. We're looking at new applications of data we've had for years, like scouting reports, and it's just you have to be very strategic in where you put your time, because we're competing against teams that have analytics departments 10 times the size of ours, literally. So that's a challenge. I think in a lot of ways it's a fun challenge, because you get to kind of shape where the department's going, because there wasn't really much there when we started, but it can be frustrating at times when you look at the size of departments of division rivals, and it just means you have to be smarter about how you use your resources and how you use your time. So that ties into the technology, the database aspect of when I started, we went to 5 to 10 different websites to pull everything we wanted for a certain project. A big part of what I did initially was just aggregating that all in one spot, so anyone in the department can pull all of that in one report easily. And that in itself, it might not change what the report ultimately looks like, but if it changes the time it takes to build that report, then you now have that new time to analyze and build proprietary models to include in that report. So it's a domino effect, and it's something most of you in here I think have a business background, so that's probably common sense to you, but it's not necessarily something that the baseball teams always think about, because there are a lot of baseball teams aren't filled with business people. So that's a lesson I learned quickly, but a key lesson to learn. So.
Okay. And so to our third and final question before we pass the floor over to you guys. While many of us were glued to our TVs a few weeks ago watching the Baseball World Series and lamenting the fact that it could have been us and not the Royals, the world of data analytics was watching everything on the field of play, capturing data, literally multiple types of data. So what did they see that perhaps we didn't see? So we have a short video clip for you from the MLB, and if you watch carefully, you'll actually see, almost as the play is unfolding, little snippets of data that will pop up assessing what each player is doing at that particular point in time. So let's watch the video.
Already facing a deficit in Game 5 against World Series Goliath Madison Bumgarner, the Royals prevented that hole from getting even deeper thanks to Lorenzo Cain's defensive exploits. Trailing 2-0 in the bottom of the 5th, James Shields faced Hunter Pence with runners at first and second and 2 outs, as the red-hot Pence sent one to deep right field. The pitch Pence pounded was on the outer half of the plate, which registered an exit velocity of 100.4 miles per hour. A surprising figure given that Pence appeared to hit the ball off the end of the bat. This perhaps explains Lorenzo Cain's initial route to the ball, as he took a few steps to his right before making an adjustment to run back towards the wall. His route efficiency on his pursuit was 94.7%. Cain was able to compensate for the change in direction with a first step time of 37/100ths of a second, needing 3.5 seconds to accelerate to his max speed of 20.7 miles per hour. There's also a degree of difficulty for Cain on his pursuit as he tracks the flight of the ball over his left shoulder. The end result was yet another outstanding defensive play by the Royals outfielder, which closed out the inning and kept Kansas City within a pair of runs.
Runners at first and second, 2-out pitch. In the air to right, back is Cain. This ball is caught. Run and grab by Lorenzo Cain. And it's virtually impossible to get a ball into the gap in between Cain and Dyson.
Okay, so here's my third question for our two guests. As we look ahead to the year 2020, 6 years from now, what will the world of data analytics look like at the Orioles and the Falcons, or more generally across MLB, NFL, or other professional sports organizations? what cool things might we expect to see happening over the next few years? And we'll start with Sarah this time.
Yeah, well, that system right there is one of them. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. It's called StatCast is kind of the name it's been given publicly, and it hasn't actually been officially rolled out. They put it in 3 stadiums, I believe, this year, and we're kind of testing it. And they started to release public videos with that sort of data during the postseason. So it's, there's, as you can tell, a huge amount of data there to go through. It's also a huge amount of data just to house. So going back to question 2, that's going to be a big question for teams. It's, millions of rows of data per game, because it's literally every single, millisecond or however they're counting it, the position of every fielder on the field, every base runner, all of that. So figuring out exactly how to just house that and then how to analyze it, whether we're going to need to completely revamp our systems, because dealing with something like PitchFX is just in another world from this. So that's a big question. But once you figure out how to do all of that, there's never-ending projects you can do, models you can build using this data. If you're familiar with defensive analysis, that there's been a lot of talk publicly about how that's behind things like offensive analysis, maybe even pitching analysis, just because there's a lot more unknowns. There's a lot more, kind of like football, there's a lot more interactions that you have to try to account for. And this, the biggest thing this gives us to start with is just the position of fielders before every play. So it allows us to control for the positioning of where they begin. It gives you, how quickly they cover ground, what routes they take, how efficient those routes are. It'll actually give us accurate measures of player speed, so we're not relying on scout stopwatches, which are never going to be perfect. There's a lot of things you can do with it, and it'll take years to make use of it all. So I think that's a big one. There's also some wearable technologies out there that I'd encourage you guys to Google if you're interested. There's one called Modus. There's been a few articles about it. It's a pitching sleeve that measures things like elbow torque on every throw and a lot of other measurements. So that's been talked a lot about in terms of injury research, which is something that is very underdeveloped in baseball. I don't know that it'll ever get more developed, because injuries are not, there's a lot of fluke injuries involved, so a lot of that's never going to be predictable. But to be, any more data we have, any more specific data in terms of, the actual stress put on different body parts, different joints, certainly can only help. So I think, teams lose $15 million a year on the DL, roughly, in MLB. So that's a huge amount of money, and if you can, save even a little bit of that, it's well worth the investment. This year especially, there were a number of high-profile, top prospect pitchers who went down with Tommy John surgery. So I think that brought it back to the forefront to some extent. And I'm sure it's something most teams are working on. It's just, always going to be difficult to predict, especially when you're using kind of data that's 1 or 2 or 3 steps removed from the actual injury. And there's a players naturally don't always tell you when they're injured, which is another aspect that makes it difficult. They have an incentive to stay on the field in a lot of senses, so they're not going to run to you the first sign of injury. So if teams are able to use technologies like a Modus sleeve to indicate to them when something's changing, when the stress is going up or the release slot is dropping or whatever it is, instead of having to wait for the player to report it, then we might save quite a bit of injury time. So yeah, I think those technologies like that, I think, are going to be the future. It all comes back to what can we measure that we have yet to measure. So I know there are a lot of companies, startups out there working on similar systems. I do think injury is a focus of many of those, but it's certainly not the only focus.
Yeah, I think in the NFL there's a lot of similar challenges related to injuries, and a lot of that is due to the amount of money going to the players versus 20 or 30 years ago. And, it's sad to say, but, 30 years ago, if a guy got hurt, that's fine. You're not as worried about it, just if he's only making a couple $100,000. But if he's making $10 million, that investment is worth investing in protecting, or worth investing in understanding, are there certain people who are more prone to those injuries than others? And there's probably no good answer to that, but there might be. And so there's a lot of work in the NFL, just the sheer number of players too. I mean, on any one roster, right? You start the year with, call it 100 guys that are out there trying to compete for the team, and you have a relatively small training staff that needs to focus on all the 100 of those guys, and you have edge decisions on who the last 5 guys on the roster are going to be, and it could come down to very different things for different teams. But the more you can understand about what did that player do in college, what might translate to the pros, or what did that player do last year, or what did he do in this scheme versus another scheme, or do players tend to have a certain drop-off at a certain number of plays or years in the league? There's a lot of trends that you can try to figure out, and it's critical because you don't have, it's critical in all sports, but in the NFL there's no farm team, there's no farm system. A guy's either on your team or he's not, really, and there's a small practice squad. But there's a lot of technology that could be brought to bear on the analytics side and on the understanding what the tendencies side are, so that you can be a little bit smarter than the old way of just looking at a lot of film and looking for tendencies and see what you spot. So I think that there is definitely work there on the on-field side. I think the NFL, though, is really focused on how can we better engage the fans, how can we give fans a better in-game experience. People can watch at home or at a bar and spend their entire Sunday from 9:30 a.m. waking up to watch the Falcons through Sunday night, and which was the case when we were in London last week. So there was a lot of reasons why someone might just sit on the couch and watch Red Zone. But how can you get that person to come to the game, to be a part of it, to get some of those experiences that they can have on the TV, but to get experiences that there's no way that they could replicate? How can you improve the in-game experience, understand what people's food and beverage buying tendencies are so you can give them the offers that matter to them, figure out where in the stadium certain food items should be. There's those side of things, but from a what are some of the cool things you can do? A lot of the new stadiums, like ours will be, have the ability to do really cool things. So the new San Francisco stadium, they worked for 2 or 3 years developing a mobile app for the fans, and when the fans come into that ballpark, it knows that they're there, it knows who they are, if they choose to tell it who they are, and they can order food from their seats. They can see live action replays of everything. There's a ton of things that they can do, and the NFL is trying to make sure that all stadiums have Wi-Fi capabilities so that people can do things on their own screen. But the number of things that people are trying to do, and the number of startups that are out there trying to come up with other cool ways to interact with fans, it is pretty crazy. And I just heard this morning, actually, the new Atlanta Braves stadium, which will also open in 2017, in their sort of premium box seats down in front. There's apparently going to be the ability for you to sort of pre-order beers or whatever, and there's going to be a mini bar for every sort of 8 seats there in that premium area. So that's pretty cool. If you could show up to a game and you already have the beers that you ordered right there, I'll take that. So I think that there's a lot of things to do on the fan experience side. Understanding how passionate fans are about the sports that they watch, understanding how much money they're investing in coming to a game, bringing their family to a game. We want to make sure that we're giving them the best possible experience.
Okay. So with that, we have about 25 minutes left until the bottom of the hour. Let's open it up to the floor. if anybody has any questions, just raise your hand and I'll come to you with a mobile microphone.
Thank you. So Sarah, you're being very modest because you were very influential in investing in some hardware that helped to produce a data flow for the ball club. So could you talk a little bit about how you have to sort of integrate some expertise and data analytics and database management and so forth, but you also have to decide what's the best way of acquiring the data, and sometimes you have to invest in the hardware. So I know you don't want to give away any trade secrets, and you don't want to, you're like I say, you're very modest about this accomplishment, but could you tell a little bit about what goes into this integration of analytics, but also investment in the facilities that can actually generate the data that will produce these insights? And if you want to name the technology that you invested in, that's fine too.
Sure. So, yeah, Steve's referring to an investment we made prior to this season in a technology that we installed in our Major League ballpark and in a few of our minor league ballparks as well. And I think some advantages of approaching it that way are that is a proprietary data source that no one else has access to unless we give them access to it. So we made a choice to enter a sharing pool with a number of other clubs that have made similar investments. So we put our data that we collected in our stadiums into the pool and received data that they collected in their stadiums in return. And that was a strategic decision we made because this particular data we felt was more valuable with more data points. I'm sure if you've done much work in analytics, you're familiar with the issue of sample size, and so that's a part of it. It's also simply a way to get access to data on more players, because not every player we're interested in comes through our stadium. But it does mean that we control who has that data. We know who has access to that data, and we know there are 10 to 15 teams that don't. Which is an important thing to know when you're negotiating with teams, because you want to understand, where they're coming from. So, I think that was a big advantage of approaching it that way. There's obviously, it's more expensive than just buying a publicly, a data stream that's available to anyone. But in my opinion, it was worth it.
Okay. Next question. I'll perhaps start at the front and I'll work my way back.
Thank you. First off, thank you guys for coming and speaking to us today. My question is for Kevin. Kevin, have you or do you plan to use analytics as it relates to sponsorship with the Falcons? And if so, can you give an example of how you might use big data or any type of analytics or advanced metrics to assess value on something that could be sold to a sponsor other than your typical eyeballs?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I think sponsorship analytics is very much in its early stages, and I would encourage anybody who has particular ideas on ways to measure that to give some thought to that. And if you're looking to get into the sports industry, use that as a potential way to talk to folks in the industry. Hey, I've had an idea about this. Have you thought about this way? Because the sponsorship organization of any sports team is a bunch of sales guys. And like most businesses, sales guys are really good at selling, and most of them aren't so good at the analytics piece of it. And so the advantage that analytics can bring is in two ways. One, if you can, as you were suggesting, identify other ways in which you can capture what people are doing and how they're interacting with sponsors, then you can prove that to sponsors and earn revenue from it. The other way is if a sponsor basically, let's say a sponsor says, we've invested it for 5 years, we're not really sure if we're getting the type of return on that investment that we'd like. The ideal would be that you have a set of analytics that says, hey, actually, we've surveyed all of our fans. Their awareness of your brand is 70%. The awareness of your competitor's brand is only 40%. When you ask public at large, it's they're both 40%. There's clearly an advantage here to your relationship with the team as it relates to awareness of your brand. And so we're very much in the infancy of that. I have not been involved in the analytics of the Falcons sponsors yet, but given how much money is at stake related to the sponsors for the new stadium, we'll definitely be getting into a lot of that. And I know that I definitely know a lot of people at other teams are as well. I think the NBA is probably the best, kind of at the forefront of a lot of the sponsorship analytics stuff of that. So.
This question's for Sarah. To what, obviously, your team plays a huge role in roster creation and figuring out what pieces go where and all those things. And so for that, congratulations on your success both this year and the past 3 years. But my question is more on, to what degree does your team help provide information or insights in terms of on-field tactical moves? So things like arming hitters with pitcher tendencies in different counts, and that's all stuff that's obviously publicly available now with pitch effects, but things like that, are there ways that your team helps, Buck Showalter and his management staff arm his players with things that will put them in positions to succeed?
Yeah, so we have one person who actually is in charge of that. Ben Morgan is our advanced scouting coordinator, and he does a fantastic job. We do work together. He utilizes our kind of technologies and our data and our interns in producing his reports for every series. That's something he really has taken and run with. When he started, we weren't shifting at all. And now we're one of the most shifting teams, if that's a word, in baseball. And Buck gets a lot of credit for that. He's been very open-minded to a lot of that. But they put a lot of effort in my first year in pitching that and really, using examples of other teams and their success rates and really selling it to the coaching staff. So both sides get credit, both for doing a good job selling it and for being open-minded. And I think it's played a huge role. So, I think they're kind of two sides to this analytics coin. One is on field and one is player evaluation. So they certainly overlap, but the way we've set it up in Baltimore is there's really one person who oversees advanced scouting, and really, he travels with the team. It really allows him to throw himself into that full time, and so I assist as needed.
Hey, I'm Michelle Andres. I'm with the Baltimore Ravens. Kevin, I'm wondering, I think you said you are business analytics, but you also have a football analytics person with the Falcons as well?
I don't get involved in the football analytics, but
there is someone there. Mm-hmm. And then do you also have business analytics?
I can't really speak to that. I'm in the baseball operations department, so that's a separate department.
But there is one?
There are people who do,
they hold themselves up and they just look at baseball all day. They don't even know what's going on.
Yeah,
we don't have a business analytics department, but we have, people doing.
So that was my next question for both of you: is how large are you one person shows, or do you have a team of people doing this? And do you see positions like yours becoming more prevalent across sports teams?
Sure. Well, I'll speak to that. I am the only business analytics person at the Falcons right now, and 6 months ago there was no one. People were doing analytics, but there wasn't a business analytics person or department. And I'm sure 3 years from now it'll be 3 to 5 people doing business analytics. And I'm just taking as a guide all the other teams that you see. My sense is that the NFL is very behind other leagues when it comes to business analytics. And part of that is just because you only have 8 home games plus 2 preseason games. Most of the seats are sold to season ticket holders, and it's pretty easy to sell a few NFL games. So on the business side, people haven't given as much thought to investing in the analytics, and that's definitely changing now. But in the MLB and NBA and NHL, where there tend to be more available seats and a lot more inventory of games to sell, it's been a necessity, and people have gotten really smart. The NBA at the Central League office level has had probably the best example of bringing in a lot of business analytics talent, thinking strategically, thinking about big data, thinking about all those things. And the MLB and NFL are getting a lot better at it now. And so I think most sports teams, if they don't already have some semblance of business analytics, are hiring now or starting to. And I think the big thing that I would advise everybody, if you're trying to think about analytics in the sports context, if you know SQL, if you know a CRM program, if you know those things, those can be really valuable to teams. And some small market teams that you wouldn't necessarily even expect have full-fledged 10-person staffs just focused on business analytics. And I think that's the way that a lot of teams are going, as they realize that there's more to do, that there is an ROI there. And so it's an investment not only in technology but also in people to do that. And I definitely think that there's still a lot of growth to be had, but it's sort of happening right now. I mean, the way sports works is that people fight like crazy to get a job in sports, and then they don't want to leave it once they have it. And so analytics actually offers a pretty interesting window, because it is a little bit of a game changer in sports related to, you always had ticket salesmen in 1900 and in 2000 and today, but you didn't always have a analytics person. And so it's a new field. There aren't established people there. There's reasons to get in. And I had done sports projects in my career while working in other companies, and just started at the Falcons this year, and now we'll be leading a department as we fill it out. So it just goes to show you that teams are starting to think about it more. And the cool thing on the business analytics side actually is that teams are very open, much more open than they are on the on-field side, where they're competing with each other. Very open to sharing best practices, trying to understand, okay, this team did dynamic pricing, this team did this, what can we learn from this team? Let's not reinvent the wheel. So that's one of the cool things I think too about business analytics in sports is, there's a pretty small industry, and in this regard, the Falcons compete a lot more with the Braves and the Hawks than we do, and the MLS team will certainly be competing against the Braves for people and money for sitting in the seats, versus if we were to talk to the Ravens or the Giants or the Cowboys or whatever it is, there's a lot of things we can learn from each other there, where we're not really competing for the exact same eyeballs.
Yeah, I'd second that. When I go to baseball analytics conferences, the business analytics sessions are by far the best, because they actually say something. The baseball ones, team execs get up there and don't say anything. Probably like I'm doing right now, but hopefully I'm a little better than that. But to answer your question, on the baseball side, we're a very small analytics department. It's not just me, but sometimes it feels like it's just me. We always want to grow. We do kind of mixed feelings about this, but we do utilize interns quite a bit, and it's fantastic from a business perspective, in the sense that they work for very little money and work very hard, and we get interns with MBAs from top 5 business schools, with masters in statistics. People with incredible resumes are willing to work for next to nothing for us, so it's really excellent from that perspective. But I wish we could make a lot of them full-time, because I think their work is worth it. But we definitely make use of interns, and when we can, we make those interns full-time. So on the business side, Kevin might be able to speak more to this, but I know I'd estimate about 10 MLB teams, if you went to their websites, have business analytics listed. The rest of them, may have...
And they were probably all hired within the last 2 years, I'd say.
Yeah, and the rest of the teams, I'm guessing, have someone, within the corporate sponsorship department or the marketing department or whatever it's called, who utilize data to some extent. But it's definitely newer, probably. And, in terms of the whole landscape of MLB, I think at this point, all 30 clubs have someone whose title includes analytics of some extent. That doesn't necessarily mean they're doing much. We don't really know what a lot of them are doing. But you can do a lot just being smart about what blogs you read and how you utilize those, that information and how you pass that along to your executives. So there's definitely a lot of low-hanging fruit out there for some of those teams that haven't done much with analytics. And, again, it's all very closely held, so I can't actually tell you, how much the Phillies are actually doing with it. But they made a big deal out of it when the Phillies finally hired someone in analytics. They were kind of the last team standing without anyone. So at this point, I think everyone is, at least publicly says they're doing something. So.
And I think on the football side, it's further behind on the on-field side. Football is a different beast. Just by its nature, it has never been so statistically focused as baseball, and so there haven't been a subculture of people surrounding it to push that thinking forward outside the teams. And so I think we're just now getting to the point where football teams are thinking more about it. And there's definitely analysis related to managing the cap, which is definitely analysis. But from an on-field and a scouting perspective, people kind of tend to do it the way that they've always done it, and it doesn't mean there's not opportunity because there's definitely opportunity there the same way it happened in all the other sports.
I have a question for Sarah. Obviously, you guys have a ton of information on all your major and minor league players, but can you talk a little bit of how you use analytics in terms of your amateur scouting and do you have that information available of who to draft and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's a component of amateur scouting. I think the key for me with any data is understanding its strengths and weaknesses. So understanding, both, the kind of two components are your scouting data and your performance data, and at different levels and in different situations, you want to kind of put more weight on those, relative to each other. So if you're talking about a major league player with 10 years of experience, not that I don't care what my scouts say, but if the performance tells me one thing, I need to have a good reason to believe that that's not the case. If you're talking about a high school player and the performance data tells me something that's different than the scouts, then I'm going to maybe question that performance data more than I otherwise would, just because there's a lot more uncertainty there. The sample is smaller, the context is constantly changing, the quality of competition is a moving target, and really, really variable across high school, especially, and even college. So it comes down to understanding the strengths and weaknesses of the data. And at the amateur level, there's a lot more weaknesses than strengths. It doesn't mean we don't factor it in, but it just, you can, it can actually hurt you to rely on data too much if it's wrong or if it's misleading. It's not just, there are cases where it's better to not use it than to misuse it. So I think that's probably always the case. So that's just something you have to kind of keep in mind and understand. And, the more data we collect at the amateur level, the more reliable it's going to be. That's definitely a difference from, professional to amateur, is we just don't have it going back as far historically. So it limits the types of models you can build. But I hope that answers your question.
This is probably more for Kevin. And I know the Falcons have had their history with this, but in more recent cases like Ray Rice, when you see players doing kind of bad things, it's generating all this negative data, I guess, tweets, Facebook posts, and whatnot. How does that affect your job in collecting that data, analyzing it, and what's the underlying effect on the business in general?
Yeah, I think that's a tough one. I mean, it's really hard to make inferences about someone's character based on past experience of different people's character, right? I mean, so I think that there are, unless you were to, I think that's where, you in the movie Moneyball, right, there's this talk about scouting versus analytics, and that's an example where it shows you how important the scouting and the talking to a human being and understanding who that person is very important, and people can change as well, right? people can fall into different crowds than they were in before. And there's a lot of talk these days about J.J. Watt, that for whether people actually knew or not, there's this assumption or this talk when you watch TV about the money didn't change him. He's still working just as hard as he was before. Is that something that you can really track in analytics? Probably not. I mean, that's something that you want to understand patterns and understand trends, but not necessarily in an analytical way. And it's just an important reminder that you can't bury yourself too much into the statistics and into the data, because no matter how fast someone's 40 time is, it's not necessarily going to tell you what type of dog activities he gets involved in.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I mean, makeup is a huge component, and I think it's a good reminder that when we talk about analytics, we're not just talking about data. So a lot of what I do, our department does, is work on incorporating the objective with the subjective. And obviously it's subjective, so there's not a perfect formula to do it. And that's where, judgment calls are made by the top executive. But it is something that we talk about a lot. And it's almost, from a business perspective, almost every year there are players on the market who are available for less than you would otherwise expect them to be because there are makeup questions surrounding them. And so you always have this question of, how much is that worth? Can we go get this talent for a lot less than they're worth? And can our manager or minor league manager, whoever it is, handle them, or are they going to bring down the team? And, you have to know the player. You make a lot of calls. You have to know your manager and how strong your clubhouse leadership is. There's a lot of, things you need to understand. But Kevin makes a good point about how people change. And, I sometimes hear people make comments about, some prospects who drink a lot or party a lot or whatever. And you have to remember, these are 19-year-olds. You all partied a lot when you were 19 too, and you grew out of it, or you will grow out of it. Most of you will grow out of it. So, I think we sometimes forget how young they are, and that, players deal with homesickness. I dealt with homesickness when I was 18 too. It doesn't mean that they're not strong mentally or they don't have good makeup. But it's just a good reminder that makeup definitely plays a role, especially, I don't know as much about NFL. I know it's grueling in its own way, but 162 game season takes a lot of stamina. It takes you're, especially in the minor leagues, which doesn't really exist in the NFL, you're in these teeny towns and small hotels on 8-hour bus rides away from your family, away from your friends. There's a lot of competition, a lot of pressure. So, it's something most of us would struggle with. So the fact that it's rare that they struggle, or at least it's rare that we hear they struggle, is pretty impressive when you think about it, in my opinion.
But yeah, I think it does require analytics, to Sarah's point, as to, okay, if someone on the scouting side says someone is either fit or might be fit to join the team, understanding where is that player in their development curve, do you expect, based on prior history of players, that their performance could improve or be sustained at the level it was before any problem that they had? It's difficult.
Hi, this is a question for Kevin. Are there any benefits to playing a game in London and missing out on all of your regular business in a game from Atlanta?
So the NFL, in its quest to grow the game globally, one English-speaking area at a time, they definitely want to make sure that the teams are made whole, because it is a big deal to lose one of 8 home games, right? People pay a lot of money for season tickets. They obviously don't have to pay for the game that they don't get, but they want to be a part of it. They have 8 tailgating opportunities a year. They want to have all 8, and so it is a tough thing for the home fans to lose a home game. And the NFL makes the teams whole from that ticket revenue perspective. There's not a financial benefit. There's not a direct financial benefit of playing the game in London for the team. It's more of a opportunity to showcase the brand in England. If you have fans in Europe that can see it there, I think in our case we had the first ever 9:30 a.m. Eastern start that people could watch us lose over breakfast. But so all those things combined, though, I was there and it was an amazing experience. The stadium, Wembley Stadium, is a great place for American football. It was really cool to see everybody in the stands wearing every single possible NFL jersey, both in terms of 32 teams, but also over the course of the last 20 years. I mean, you see Dan Marino jerseys, and you see everything. People just put on whatever NFL jersey they happen to have, and some people over there have acquired random affiliations for U.S. teams in the way that some of us have random affiliations with English Premier League teams that might just be because you knew someone or you happen to see a certain game on TV or they were good one year or whatever it is. And so I think it's really great for the NFL to be showcasing itself, and cool to see the fan base over there, and the revenue side of our business doesn't change directly. We benefit when the league benefits overall. But man, the logistics involved in putting that thing on were crazy. I mean, I think that was the 10th game. There's a lot of experience sharing among the teams that have been over there to understand what goes into it and how to do it. But one of the hardest parts was tracking down, 53 guys' passports. It was like you were asking them for $1 million back, just to find their passport and bring it to you and then hold on to it and then give it back to them afterwards. And by afterwards, I mean literally they show the TSA guy they walk through and then you take it back from them so they don't lose it again. And so the logistics involved in it were crazy. The experience was wonderful, minus the outcome. And I think it's a really cool experiment for the NFL.
Okay, for those of you who are looking for career advice, and maybe there's some of you out there looking for that type of thing, I thought we'd maybe wrap up with just a couple of suggestions from the panelists for what they would recommend that you consider doing as you're going into the workforce, either in the near term or in the longer term. Sarah.
Sure. So baseball side, or probably the sports side, but I can't really speak to the other major sports leagues, is a little bit different than the business side from what I've heard, at least. Unfortunately, you pretty much have to start as an intern. So that's not to say there aren't exceptions, but for the most part, every full-time person in our office in the last 5 years, 6 years started as an intern for us, did a full-year internship, and did a good enough job and was in the right place at the right time and was made full-time. I was lucky and only had to do one full-year internship with the Orioles, but I have colleagues who had to do them for a few different teams. A lot of it's timing. So personally, just to give you kind of a background on what I did, I basically reached out to 30 MLB teams cold. I sent emails, individual emails to roughly 300 people in different front offices. And I heard back from roughly 22 of the 30 teams and kind of went from there, did phone interviews with some of them, and ultimately got internship offers. So that's basically, the way you have to do it. We don't post internships. We don't really post jobs either. So it's unfortunate because it makes it a lot harder to break in, but you just can't be shy. You've got to send emails and ask what their hiring process is, ask what their timeline is when they hire interns. Every team is different. So we really make it hard for you to figure it out. In terms of what skills I'd recommend, I'm sure you've heard it a million times, but learn SQL. Pretty much any team that's doing real analytics at this point has an internal SQL database where they store all their data. Some teams are Oracle, some teams are Microsoft, but they're all SQL. So learn that. It's a really easy language to learn. I taught myself. I wish I hadn't. I wish I'd taken a comp sci class of any sort really in college, and I just wasn't smart enough to do that. So if you have a chance. It's
called IS 353.
There you go. Do that. Take that. But if you can't take that, find some online tutorials. They don't take that long, and you'll pick it up pretty quickly. The best way to learn it is to have a project you want to do and force yourself to do it with it. The tricky part of doing it yourself is you have to build a database with statistics to play with. There are some publicly available databases out there. RetroSheet is one. There's a database called the Lehman database that has historical baseball data going back, decades and decades. So there are a lot of articles out there that kind of teach you how to set those up. So if you're really serious about it, I'd recommend spending a few hours trying to download, a free version of MySQL, set yourself up a database, and start just playing around with accessing data. Because that's something that any team, especially if you want to get into analytics, is going to ask. But at this point, even if you don't want to go into analytics, even if you're interested in more general baseball operations, our pro scouting, our player development, our amateur scouting, they all utilize our SQL database. So it's a really good skill to have. On the analytics side, we use R. That's not to say you can't use another similar program. R's biggest advantage is it's free. So you can all download it and learn it. But for the most part, we're using R. We're not using things like Excel at this point. R connects directly to our SQL database, so that has a lot of advantages. And those are the two main technical programs I'd recommend getting some experience in.
In terms of career advice on the business side of sports, I will talk generally. I've thought a lot about this over the last 10 years. I graduated from Boston College in 2006. I learned SQL from that guy at some point way back when. And there are benefits to having the technical skills. I will say you should just do some really hard thinking about why you would want to work in sports. Don't just do it because it sounds cool. It requires sacrifices, both in terms of the level of position that you would get, and certainly the amount of pay that you can get. There's a lot of people that would love to work in sports, and the people that do end up being willing to work for less than they could make doing something else. So for some people, that equation is not going to work very well, and for some people, they don't care. They're going to do it anyway. I think on the business side that there's historically in sports there's a lot of hey, we're going to hire a marketing guy or a ticketing guy. We might as well just hire this sponsor's nephew because the sponsor's nephew is going to do fine, and then maybe the sponsor will buy more. So there is a lot of that, and you have to fight against that. And the best way to fight against that is dedication and actual demonstration of the skills that you have, but also being opportunistic and being willing to say, hey, sure, I graduated with this degree or this major or whatever, but I'm willing to, help out the groundskeeper for 6 months if you, want to be involved in stadium operations or something like that. If you want to be involved in analytics, then maybe it's, hey, think up a project idea that you can pitch to somebody and work for free for 4 to 8 weeks, either on-site or remotely or while you're in college or whatever, on some project that will get yourself involved maybe with that organization, or just even being able to put on your resume, hey, independent project, 8-week long, with the Washington Wizards. And then as long as that person at the Wizards is willing to say, yeah, this person worked for me, they were great, then that's a big, huge step. So there's a general sports aspect of do what you can to get your foot in the door. It's not easy. It does take dedication. The other technical thing I think that I would add in addition to SQL or R is data visualization is a big thing that we're doing more and more of. So learning Tableau, which is you can get use for free, or depending on what classes you're taking, there SAS or whatever other programs might be involved in that, because sometimes people think of analytics as being really, really deep regression-based analyses, and that's definitely part of it. But to some extent, you also just need to be able to organize data and spit it back out in a way that people hadn't thought of before. You could build a statistical model that says based on these factors and this and that and the other thing and the correlations and blah blah blah, this many people are likely to renew and this many people aren't. Or you can take data points. That's important. But there's also an easier level of, hey, can you take data and just show our sales for each game with a certain profit percentage below it or whatever, just setting up charts. One of the most interesting examples, I think, of data visualization that I've seen recently is that the Atlanta Braves, they've decided to put their new stadium outside the downtown core of Atlanta. And one of the reasons that, I can't speak to exactly why they did it. There's a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons that makes a lot of sense that they've talked about publicly is that they're actually moving the stadium closer to where their fans are. And you can Google this chart. It was made, I think, in Tableau. They took a map and put a pin, a dot for where all of their single game ticket buyers are, and then a separate map for where all their season ticket holders are. And rather than being clustered all around, equidistant around the downtown, that's not how Atlanta works. All the ticket buyers go all north. So having a stadium right in the middle and all your ticket buyers being up here is less than ideal. It's really hard for those people to get there. They're moving the stadium 12 miles north, which actually puts the stadium more in the center of where their ticket buyers were. And that's when the stadium was down here. So you can imagine, of course, that'll allow for even more people north and more frequency of purchases. So that's an example of just taking data that exists, manipulating it, and putting it into a visualization tool can be very powerful. And that's, I think, a lot of what sports teams are looking for, because sports teams, relative to other companies, are actually pretty unsophisticated on the business side related to data. And even just some of those simple, hey, I can take that data for you and put it in a chart can be useful. So being able to develop some of those technical skills is important, but also having the dedication, going to sports analytics conferences or doing things like that just to be able to talk the talk. You can look up the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference if you haven't already. They have different videos of panels that they have there, so you don't even need to go to Boston to go to it. You can watch those panels and just get a sense for the lingo and understand what people are doing, and maybe you'll think of ideas for either starting a company that can service that or being able to get hired by a team.
Okay, unfortunately we are out of time. We're actually over time. We have a small little token of appreciation for our two guests. Thank you all very, very much for attending. If you would like to stick around, we have some refreshments. They're directly outside the door on the atrium level. I presume you guys will be around for a little while longer. So if you have any questions perhaps that you'd like to take offline, they'd be more than happy to chat with you.